Good morning, Friendship United Methodist Church. I'd like to welcome you on this 24th day of September 2023. There was a British woman, Marian Webster of Solihull, England, who woke up one morning, found her beautiful garden absolutely decimated. Something or someone had torn it to shreds. She was beside herself. And the first thing Marian did after finding her garden in such a terrible condition was to march over to her neighbor's flower garden and pull all the pansies and roses and anything remotely resembling a beautiful plant. Her neighbor's garden now looked as bad as hers did. Why did she do such a thing? And you won't believe it, okay? Marian was reportedly convinced that her neighbor had grown so jealous of Marian's beautiful garden that she had trained a squirrel to destroy it. Yes, okay? And that was Marian's immediate reaction. If Marian couldn't have a beautiful garden, her neighbor couldn't have one either. It's sort of hilarious, isn't it? But it's sad as well. That green-eyed monster of envy and jealousy, my goodness. So our theme for today is overcoming envy. Jesus told a parable about a landowner who went into the marketplace early in the morning to hire laborers for his vineyard, okay? About 6 o'clock in the morning. It was a common practice in rural communities, even in some places today. Now, those he hired, he agreed to pay the standard wage for a day's work. 3 hours later, he saw that the work wasn't going to be completed on time. He had a pretty good crop going here, and he was going to need more laborers. So he went to and returned to the marketplace and hired more workers. About noon, he thought, man, this is a bumper crop. It is, wow, this is tremendous. And he found it necessary to hire more workers. Then again at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and then again at 5 o'clock in the afternoon. At 6, he had his foreman line up the laborers to be paid. And he began with those who had worked only 1 hour, that he had hired at 5 o'clock. And he paid them for a full day. Wow. Watching eagerly were those who had worked since 6 o'clock that morning, friends, and they were rubbing their hands in delight. Wow, they thought to themselves. If he pays them a full day's wage for 1 hour, think of how much he's going to pay us. When their time came, however, they also received the standard wage pay that they had agreed to, but they were furious. They had worked all, and I would be too, wouldn't you? Think about it. They'd be more than a little upset. They had worked all day, and they were receiving the same amount as those guys who had worked just 1 hour. It wasn't fair. It just wasn't fair. And besides that, it was cooler in the evening than it was in the heat of the day. So let's pick up the story in Matthew's words, okay? But the landowner answered them, "Friend, I'm not being unfair to you. Didn't you agree to work for a denarius? That's what you agreed. Take your pay and go. I want to give the man who was hired the last the same as I gave you. Don't I have the right to do what I want with my money? Or are you envious because I am generous? Are you envious because I'm generous?" Then Jesus adds this cryptic phrase, "So the last will be first, and the first will be last." Are you envious because I'm generous? That's what the landlord asked the laborer in the vineyard, who was angry because he had worked all day and had received the same wage as the worker who had worked 1 hour. Now, this parable, which is unique in Matthew's gospel, by the way, can be approached from many, many different directions. For example, we could debate the fairness of the owner of the vineyard. Was it fair? What do you think? Joan? Bill? For example, as we debate the fairness of that, we might debate whether this man's solution to his labor problem is a little too close to socialism in our capitalistic society, right? Generally, the people who had worked all day had a point. It wasn't fair. I agree with them. But I would ask you to consider the question of the owner of the vineyard that he asked. Okay? Are you envious because I'm generous? It's my money, right? Envy or jealousy, and they're sometimes used interchangeably, friends, is a major problem in many people's lives even today. The workers in the vineyard were happy with their wage until they discovered their co-workers were getting a far better deal. And then they were angry. It's always been so. And sometimes go through the Bible and count the many times people are said to be envious or jealous. Go through and read. And how much havoc they created because of this deadly state of mind, this jealousy or envy. For example, we can go back to the first chapters of the Bible. We encounter Cain and Abel, don't we? In the course of time, Cain brought some of the first fruits of the soil as an offering to the Lord. And Abel also brought first fruits, fat portions from the firstborn of his flock. The Lord looked with favor on Abel and his offering, but on Cain and his offering, he did not look on with favor. So Cain was very, very, very angry. And his face was downcast, it said. I can see Cain, it's the veins on his neck and across his forehead just throbbing, And you know the result of Cain's envy, don't you? What did he do? Yeah, that's right. He murdered Abel. This was his brother. But he killed him out of envy. And is there any more emotion more basic to our nature than the jealousy of another's gain? Is there any more emotion more deadly? Think of the persons have lost their lives over jealousy, over girlfriends or boyfriends. Wow. And there's the story of one of the finest men in the Bible, Joseph. Joseph was thrown into a pit and sold into slavery by his brothers because, among other things, they were envious of what? His coat of many colors, weren't they? That's right. Wasn't that a bit of an overreaction? Yeah, there had been a lot leading up to that, but this was the straw that broke the camel's back, okay? And then there was the King Saul's envy of David. And remember how David came to the battlefront and volunteered to go fight against Goliath? Yeah. Nobody wanted to go. David did. And remember how David slew Goliath? And he came back from the battlefield, and the women sang, Saul has slain his thousands, but David has slain his 10,000s. And a sickness began to grow in Saul's heart. So much so that you read in the Old Testament that Saul spent the rest of his life tracking down David in an attempt to kill him out of anger and jealousy in his heart. The stories of the destructiveness of envy in the scriptures are legion. Even in the New Testament, we read about Herod, who sought to kill every baby that was born in that region because he was so envious of any would-be rivals that might come along and take the throne. That same envy is displayed by the elder brother in the parable of the prodigal son. It isn't fair that my younger brother should receive a welcome like this, Dad. It isn't welcome, it isn't right that he should receive a welcome like this because I have stayed home all these years in your house. and I've never received a party like this one. Wah, 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 wah. Boy, I can hear him crying now, can't you? All the way. Green-eyed monster of jealousy. I want the same that you have, and I will never be happy until I receive it. Pamela Pentler, in a little book entitled The Joy of Stress, wrote a satirical essay on this subject, and in a section titled, They're Getting Ahead of You, okay? She tells about a young man who went berserk one day in late 1969 in the research library at the University of Berkeley, University of California at Berkeley. So I can see why anyone goes there. They go bonkers, you know. And he ran through the library shouting hysterically at his fellow students, "Stop! Stop! You're getting ahead of me! You're getting ahead of me!" And for that, he was arrested. According to Miss Petler's, this young man's only crime was being born in the wrong decade. He lived in the laid-back 60s. It was not until the stress-filled 80s, she says, that we became obsessed that others were getting ahead of us. Simply stated, she says, people are getting ahead of you. Every day, all the time. While you're at your desk, people are working out at the gym and they're getting ahead of you. While you're at the gym, your co-workers are getting ahead of you. If a friend gets a promotion at work, they've gotten ahead of you. If a colleague writes a book or reads a book that you haven't read or written, they're getting ahead of you. While you're reading this book, she writes, everyone is getting ahead of you, everyone. The beauty of the concept is that it can be applied across the board, anytime, anywhere. For an example, on the road. Oh my goodness, road rage, you know, and drivers of more expensive cars have gotten ahead of you, and and we go down there and we're in such a hurry, you know, and the family's with us and we're on vacation and we want to get there and we pull in and get gas, and all of a sudden we see those cars that we've passed going over the freeway bridge. And we've got to hurry up. And you're like, well, let's get away. No, we can't. I've got to get those cars. Why? They passed me. I've got to catch them. You know. And thanks to the social media, this attention is only getting worse. The internet creates a networked world that allows everybody to compare everything instantly. How much money are you making compared to the people your own age who graduated from the same college you did? How many words does your baby know versus the millions of babies around the globe of her exact age, his or her exact age, and this ability to benchmark yourself in just virtually seconds, Popcorn suggests, will create an epidemic of comparative anxiety, a national wave of insecurity. And it's not only young people who are tempted by such comparisons. Best-selling business author Simon Sinek gives a motivational speech called Understand the Game, where he mentions a study asking people if they would rather live in a $400,000 home on a street where the rest of the houses are $100,000, or would they live in a $1 million home on a street where all the other homes are $2 million. People chose the $400,000 home over the $1 million home, even though it was lower in value than the $1 million house, because they wanted to be better than their neighbors. I hope I've given you a sense of how pervasive this problem is and how destructive it can be to our human relationships, guys. But what can we do so that we're not tempted to covet something that someone else has or is? And the first step is to recognize that envy and jealousy do exist, and they can be destructive to our well-being or even could cause us to harm someone in ways that we couldn't imagine. Persons that we envy, we could get vicious with them. The composer and conductor Leonard Bernstein was once asked which musical instrument is the most difficult to play. What would you say, Alice? Mm-hmm. And he reputedly answered second fiddle. I can get plenty of first violinists, but to find someone that can play second fiddle with enthusiasm is a real problem. It's like we've talked about First Methodist churches or First Baptist churches or First Presbyterian churches, but I've never seen a Second Presbyterian, Methodist, or Baptist in a town. I'm still looking though, okay? Every one of us is exposed daily to people who have something we would like to have. It might be a larger house or perfect children, perfect teeth, and don't laugh, friends. The list contains all kinds of things that people can envy. Maybe they have more hair than you. It doesn't bother me, but some people it does. In all kinds of atmospheres, envy can flourish. In Parker and Hart's The Wizard of Ed comic strip, one monk is putting up a sign on the bulletin board in front of the church while another monk watches. And the sign reads, "Thou shalt not covet." And the visiting monk says, "Boy, I wish our church had a signboard like that." It's funny, but it can happen in the choir, in Sunday school class, a committee meeting, anywhere. We need to understand that envy is a devious strategy of the devil, friends. And it's used to divide us and to delay the coming of the kingdom of God. Envy or jealousy can arise anywhere, even in church, and it does. And the second step to deal with envy is to develop a strong attitude of gratitude for the things that we do have, okay? Most of us are wonderfully blessed, and if we daily counted our blessings as the old hymn advises, then we would spend less time envying the blessings that our neighbors possesses. And by the way, if you're a person who has been blessed more than the average person, you should guard against flaunting those blessings. There's a story of a group of mountain climbers who set out to conquer a mountain, and among them was one with little experience, at climbing, and they told him how to do it. He watched, but he kept on climbing, and for several hours they climbed. And once they got to the top of the mountain, the first-time climber stood straight up with his arms raised like this and yelled, "I did it!" And a gust of wind nearly blew him off the top of the mountain. And it was then that the more experienced climbers explained to him that when you get to the top of the mountain, you never stand straight up, but rather you drop to your knees to avoid being blown off the mountaintop. Good advice in almost any situation of our life. And the third step in dealing with envy is to realize that some of the unhappiest people in the world, they're unhappy because they can never get enough. But some of the happiest people in the world have a servant attitude toward others. Servant attitude, and that's what we're called to have. Called to serve, friends. Serve and be faithful. Don't let envy, jealousy, deprive you of the many blessings that lie before you. Go in peace. Go forth with blessings you've received to bless the lives of others. Go forth to fulfill the Great Commission and make disciples. And this church will flourish. Every church that does this will flourish. They won't die a death, like many churches do. but they will flourish because you're making disciples for Jesus Christ.